Hello, and thanks for joining another of the Good Project's professional development sessions about our core concepts. Today's session is going to be about the concept of dilemmas and also how to have effective dilemma discussions. So we'll look at what a dilemma is, as well as how to potentially use some guidelines to have effective dilemma discussions with your students in your classroom. First, a simple definition. What is a dilemma? So what do we mean when we hear this word or use this word? A dilemma is a situation or set of circumstances that requires an active choice to be made. So somebody faces a particular situation and they must make a choice. However, in making that choice, there are different potential pathways. So there are different options that someone is weighing. And then this is crucial that each potential pathway requires a compromise or a sacrifice. So out of all the options, there's no perfect solution that's going to provide an easy way out or for the person to get everything that they might want or be considering. There are sacrifices or trade-offs that need to be made in the situation. So that's a simple definition of what a dilemma is and how we can think about it. Dilemmas have a variety of influences or causes. There could be any number of factors involved in what's causing a dilemma for any particular person. These are maybe some of the most common. So first, personal relationships. That could be relationships with colleagues, with friends, with family members. As we navigate those relationships, there might be tricky situations that come up. A lot of relationships, or a lot of dilemmas are about relationships, and how people relate to one another. They could be about values and balance. So dilemmas are often influenced by what we hold dear or particular values that we have. For example, in a situation, we might be wondering about a trade-off between honesty to a friend versus loyalty to a friend. That could be a set of values that could be in tension in this situation. This third middle category, identities and responsibilities. So if you've seen our PD session on responsibilities and the rings of responsibility, you'll know that a lot of times our responsibilities in particular situations can be in conflict. That can cause a dilemma. Maybe when you feel you have a different responsibility to yourself in a particular set of circumstances versus a responsibility to your workplace or to the people who are around you, members of your team. Certain maybe wide-scale events can also cause dilemmas or be involved in dilemmas. So COVID is an example that we all lived through. And we saw that during COVID, there were many different dilemmas people were facing about how much socialization should I be trying to do right now, given the risks that are involved. How can I protect others who are around me? How can I do my work or, make that visit to a family member in this situation? So those types of situations can cause trade-offs to come up or for us to consider trade-offs. There are other macro events, for example, maybe, certain political circumstances that also often cause people to feel a dilemma. And then finally, technological or social change. So AI is a big cause of dilemmas that we hear about lately. For example, the rise of platforms like ChatGPT that have resulted in a lot of questions about how young people in particular, but also workers should be using these kinds of technologies to make workplace decisions or to help them with workplace tasks or with tasks that they need to do as a student, like writing. How much of an influence or role should those platforms play? That can sometimes cause a dilemma as well. And I know a lot of people are thinking about that nowadays. Our hope at the Good Project, though, is that recognizing these dilemmas are really common. Our goal is to try to get people to handle them in a little more of a nuanced way. So we often at the Good Project use dilemma narratives, and all of those are available for free on our website. They are stories about people who face a real life set of circumstances in which they have to make a decision or a choice, or they are facing competing priorities. And through those exploration of those dilemmas, we're hoping that people will be able to handle dilemmas in the hypothetical when they read those stories, but also in real life. Hopefully there's a transference there with attentiveness to lenses like excellence, ethics, and engagement. So those 3 E's of good work that we often talk about, even when these factors are in competition. So ultimately, it's for people to develop what we would call the practical wisdom to know how to respond to dilemmas effectively in ways that can prioritize character virtues and values in everyday life. And what is practical wisdom when we say that? So the practical wisdom to be able to respond to a dilemma. Practical wisdom is a concept that comes from the character literature, and it's something that is made up of these different component parts. And we're hoping that by exposing people to dilemma scenarios, by getting them practicing thinking about these scenarios, that they will ultimately develop this meta skill of practical wisdom that's made up of these component parts, and that the dilemma scenarios are a way for them to practice these parts. So first, like moral sensitivity here on the left is this idea of you are able to recognize when there is an ethical situation or a moral situation at play, you're sensitive to it. You have moral judgment, so you know how to exercise judgment and discernment in a particular situation. On the right, you see emotional regulation, so the ability to regulate your feelings and emotions, to handle those in the situation. And then also at the top, this final piece of moral identity. So you have this idea of yourself as somebody who wants to be making these moral decisions, has this ethical component, and maybe an aim to flourish, as is written below it. All of these add up to having the practical wisdom to know how to handle particular ethical situations as they arise. So now we wanted to dive into some discussion ideas or protocols that can help in talking about dilemma discussions or dilemma situations with your students. So one way to do this is what we would call the 5Ds, which is a series of lenses that we have developed at the Good Project. So those are define, discuss, deliberate, decide, and debrief. So in handling any one particular set of dilemma circumstances, you would first want to define the dilemma. So recognizing, maybe having the sensitivity, as we just talked about in practical wisdom, to recognize a dilemma as having a difficult situation that you aren't sure what to do. There's no right course of action. Second, discuss. So consulting and brainstorming with other people, or maybe even having an internal discussion with yourself, knowing to think about the factors that are involved in the situation that are leading to the dilemma and what the various courses of action are. Third is deliberate, so being able to engage in a reflection and consider what options are available from what I've brainstormed. What do I think of all of these options? How do I weigh them? Finally, decide here as the fourth step, so making and finally carrying out that decision. And then we like this debrief as the fifth step. So once you've made the decision, coming back and reflecting on the impacts of that decision, what you've learned, and what then maybe you would want to do differently for next time, or perhaps in a similar situation. However, the 5Ds are not the only way to think about discussing dilemmas or breaking down dilemmas to be more understandable and actionable for students. So you could also use these 4 lenses that we have developed as well. So first, roles. What are the different roles that a person in a dilemma situation is inhabiting, whether that's you yourself or someone you're reading about? How are those roles in conflict with one another, potentially? Second, responsibilities. So what are the various responsibilities that this person is balancing to the world, to themselves, to others, to their community? Again, this idea of the rings of responsibility and how those can maybe add up to a picture where different items are in conflict. Values is third. So what values does this person hold dear, and are any of those in tension? And then finally, zooming out from the individual, alignment and misalignment. So thinking about the different stakeholder groups that are involved in any particular dilemma. Are their goals in harmony or in discord? How does that play into the situation? What are the systemic factors at play? And then yet a third way to discuss dilemmas is to bring in some of those frameworks that we talked about from our ethics professional development session. So just as a reminder, these were the lenses of a deontological or rule-based reasoning or view of ethics, having a particular rule that you're trying to follow or that cannot be broken, a utilitarian reasoning, so the idea of doing the greatest good for the greatest number. And then finally, maybe the one that we tend to align most with at the Good Project, a character or virtues-based reasoning approach. So the idea that there are certain character virtues, things like maybe empathy or telling the truth, honesty, that are to be respected and that are to be strived for in a particular situation. So these are a few different ways you can think about using frameworks to help you in dilemma discussions with students. So they were the 5Ds, the 4 lenses, and the ethical frameworks. So we just wanted to give a moment to pause here to think about whether you used one of those particular frameworks, one of those 3 from the preceding slides, and if so, how did that go? Or alternatively, what other frameworks have you used to analyze dilemmas? These 3 that I've talked about are, again, far from the only ones you can use to have dilemma discussions. And you can kind of pause and consider here if you're alone or have a discussion with your colleagues, if you are doing this as part of a group. What other frameworks have you used? What do you think is an effective way to have a dilemma discussion, or what have you learned from your practice so far? So take a moment to consider this and pause the video here. And when you're ready, come back. So now that you've had a chance to think about maybe how you've handled dilemma discussions in your own practice, we also wanted to present these guidelines for discussing dilemmas that we've developed from insights from what we've read and learned about dilemma discussions. So this is about how to prepare, maybe even before you jump into the dilemma discussion, to be certain that students are ready to kind of have that level of conversation with one another. So first is this idea of developing trust and belonging, making sure that students are ready to have conversations with one another that are based on a sense of trust, that they're able to do that, and there's a group dynamic that will support that kind of conversation happening. Second, creating norms for discussion. So being explicit about what norms, things like we're going to respect our perspectives of one another, even when they diverge, or we're not going to solve this dilemma in every aspect of it, but we're going to explore it and maybe come to some deeper insights than we would have otherwise. Those can be effective norms, and many others about how to kind of set the ground rules for how a discussion is going to go. Third is to teach discussion skills explicitly, which I'll talk about a little bit in a second. Fourth is to be ready to deal with controversy. So we know that dilemmas, depending on what the focus of them is, they can be about certain hot button issues, political topics, social issues. They might provoke some strong emotions and also controversy, and just to be ready to deal with those. So there are some suggestions on a blog post on our website that this is drawn from, for you to be able to know how to maybe deal with that a little bit, based on some suggestions and resources that are there. And then fifth is to engage in metacognitive reflection. So to have the moment to step back maybe at the conclusion of a dilemma discussion, or to have students practice that even before they jump into a dilemma discussion, to be able to synthesize their learning. That can be helpful to do. So I wanted to zoom in just with one suggestion on teaching discussion skills explicitly with one practice that we have seen, which is Harkness discussion. So if you haven't encountered the idea of Harkness discussion before, I definitely recommend reading either this article that's referenced here that these images are taken from, or we have a blog post on our site that explains what Harkness is. And our team member, Shelby Clark, has also written and observed many Harkness or written about and observed many Harkness environments. But basically, it's this idea that you can see a traditional Socratic seminar happening on the left, where all of the discussion, or most of the discussion, is kind of flowing through the teacher. The teacher is in this position where they're really directing what's happening at the table with these students. Students might make a comment directly to the teacher might say something back, and then the teacher might, call on a different student. Versus you can see here on the right in a Harkness discussion, which is a practice of roundtable discussion that was developed at a private school here in Massachusetts. Basically, the conversation is much more free-flowing. Students are responding to one another and having conversations themselves. They are much more the students in direction or in a place to be directing the conversation rather than the direction of conversation flowing entirely through the teacher, who's this red dot here on the right. So you can see here that Harkness is maybe an effective way to try to get students to be exploring topics together, to be delving deeply into one another's thoughts in a way that tries to bring out their authentic perspectives, and also practice their questioning and conversation skills more than a Socratic seminar might. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in this practice just to learn a little more and read the blog post by Shelby on our website as well. So again, this is a moment we wanted to give you time to think about what you've heard about these 5 principles or guidelines for dilemma discussions. So again, developing trust and belonging, creating norms for discussion, teaching discussion skills explicitly, being ready to deal with controversy, and engaging in metacognitive reflection. Think about what are some practices you would like to share with others related to one or more of these steps. Maybe there's something that you've done in your classroom in an innovative way to create norms for discussion. Maybe there's something that you like to do to be ready to deal with controversy or a way you've handled controversy in the past that you could share with colleagues. So again, you can take a moment to pause the video here and think about this either individually or discuss with others. As a wrap up to this session, we want you to consider what is one small step you'd like to take next time you see your students based on what we have talked about today. So this doesn't have to be anything big. It doesn't have to be anything that's going to revolutionize what you do in your classroom today. But just think about, based on what we've heard and discussed about dilemma discussions, what is one small thing you could do? One way that you're now thinking about having dilemma discussions or similar discussions with your students based on this session. Thank you so much for joining, and we hope that you have learned something. Have a good rest of your day.